All right, we are back to Screwtape Letters. We are going to read through letters 3 and 4. We started off last week, and I think everybody got on board pretty quick with the whole backwards morality and reading in between the lines to try to figure out what Screwtape was responding to. So Wormwood must have written him something or other about what had happened, and we don't get that letter, but we get Screwtape's responses, and so that's going to be an ongoing sort of puzzle. Every letter, we're going to try to piece together what the situation must have been like, or what must have come up. So we're going to start off in 3, and I said before that this is my grandfather's copy. It's a copy from the 60s. Here comes Janet. Hey, we just started. And what I really love about this is, knowing that he read this too, and he highlighted stuff. And so I always notice these little highlights that he has made. And this letter, number 3, actually starts off with a highlighted portion from him. And I think this is really neat. This is what he highlighted. It's just the 3rd sentence. The enemy will be working from the center outward. The enemy will be working from the center outward, meaning God works on us from the insides out. And so how is that striking you in a general sense? God works from the inside out.
Touches our heart.
Touches your heart, right?
It's comforting.
Comfort, absolutely. So in relation to this letter, remember this, we've gotten some piece of correspondence we haven't seen. And so all the responses in letter 3, at least, are going to be about a particular subject. What's the subject? The patient and his mother. So we've got a little backstory here that we're going to wind up piecing together. And so in relation to these issues with the mother, the man and his mother, what is Screwtape alluding to, that God works from the center outwards? This is going to kind of come up repeatedly in a practical application.
Their relation,
okay,
to each other.
To each other. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think the relation of the patient, the guy,
right,
to God.
Yes.
God
yes.
is working in his center to bring to a better relationship with him.
Sure. So, when we think about the work of the Holy Spirit, and that's on any disciple, but certainly a new Christian, that is often an internal process in just a practical sense first. That then, and if I have a repeated theme in my sermons, and I probably have several, one of them is about our outsides matching our insides. That we say we've got these convictions, but can anybody tell? Does it come outward in our behavior, in our actions, in our words, in our attitudes? God is genuinely working on our souls and in our thought processes and in our convictions, in our inner life. But then that is the sacramental life, where it is the outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace. That what God does on the inside may not be immediately evident on the outside, but it will begin to flow outward. One of the often repeated metaphors and illustrations throughout the New Testament is both the individual person, but also sometimes Christians, the whole of the church, in terms of growing things like trees and plants that bear fruit, for instance, or seeds that get planted and sprout. And when you think of that, there's a lot that's happening on the inside of the tree before the fruit is actually visible. And there's a lot going on before the visible fruit is actually ripe and edible. So we talked last week a little bit about the new converts, and they often have this kind of double whammy of a lot of fervor and passion, but also a lot of anxiety and worry. And so think about it in those terms. If this guy is still a relatively recent convert, a relatively young Christian, what do his daily habits look like?
Same old.
Probably pretty similar to what they've been. Changing. But has he done a 180 in everything? Has he done a 180 in the habits that don't look like they have anything to do with his faith? Meaning, how much of our day is just based on habit? Side of the bed you sleep on, how you get up out of bed. Do you what's your morning routine? Do you go to the bathroom first? Do you get a cup of coffee first? Do you blah blah? Which way do you drive to the store? Do you take the same route every time? All these little things that we just don't think about because our brains are kind of wired to develop patterns, so we don't have to think about absolutely everything. We couldn't do that. You couldn't be in deep thought about every decision you make every day. So there's probably a lot of stuff in this guy's life that he hasn't even tried to connect with his faith yet. The way that you go to work, what does that have to do with your faith in Christ? Maybe nothing, but maybe something. But as it's still growing and germinating, still spreading. So God working from the center outward, how is this in relation, you think, to his mother, him and his mother?
Well, I mean, he grew inside of her, first of all. He said.
Okay. Sure. So there's definitely
things growing.
Right?
He was a baby once.
But they have a relationship.
A very long-standing one. The longest-standing one in his life is with his mother. Like you said, he grew inside of her.
They're living together, even though he's not brand new.
Right. Ostensibly, this is a grown man of some sort, probably relatively young, maybe mid-late 20s. I don't know. We don't have a good sense just yet. But he's not a child.
But neither is his mother, because they talk about her having rheumatism.
Rheumatism, which is that's a code word for being a little on the older side.
Yes.
So what kind of habits do you think have been established between an adult child living with his parents?
Well, he's at the age that he knows everything, and it's probably a real pain in the neck living with his mother, especially if he's older.
And from the patient's point of view, from the guy's point of view, he's probably seen a lot of habits in her that he's not overly fond of. So God working in us from the inside to the outside, all of these habits that are in process maybe of changing but aren't there yet. And we're going to bump into a bunch of them, I think, that just have to do with the habits of the person you live with, the people you are closest to, the people that you see all day, every day. There's kind of an aphorism that no one can hurt you as deeply as someone that you're very close to, because obviously, the sharp words of someone that you depend upon strike you differently than a stranger. But I will also say nobody annoys you like someone that you care the most about or that you're around the most. Strangers annoying you is a passing thing. Maybe it happens, but then it's here and gone. Mm-hmm. But the person who annoys you, and they annoy you every day, that kind of changes things. So that here we are with this. Now, how does what is Screwtape kind of setting up here in this first paragraph about finding out that this patient lives with his mother, this adult man lives with his mother? He gives us some initial advice right off the bat.
He talks about their mutual annoyance.
Okay, mutual annoyance, yes.
Mm-hmm. To observe What drives each one crazy
A-
about
ab-
the other?
Absolutely. And how is he going to find out about the mother? He's got a there's a fun little aside.
Keep in touch with Bluebos.
Glubos, who is the tempter assigned to the mother. So there, you've got a whole team out there. And so they are working independently of each other. However, it seems like a little teamwork is going to happen. I'll think for just a moment about hellish teamwork. Can bad guys and villains work together?
Oh, yeah.
They can. Is it easy for them to do?
Maybe sometimes.
Well, initially, I think it is, until other personalities come out or ideas change or someone sees something a different way than
Right.
I've seen them in movies turn on each other.
Sure. So when you're a bad guy, when you're a villain, you are always looking out for yourself. So you don't really have maybe a tight teammate so much as you do an accomplice. And that changes the nature of the relationship because you can turn on an accomplice. As long as it's mutually beneficial, the bad guys work together. But as soon as, how many bad guys will sacrifice themselves for another bad guy? The idea is as soon as it is to my advantage to cut somebody loose, I'm going to cut them loose. As soon as it's my advantage to pull one over on them, I'm going to pull one over on them. As long as it works for us to work together, we're going to work together. But they always have kind of one eye open towards each other, don't they? So I'm just kind of imagining you're going to get this good information from this other tempter because basically some of this information is going to be useful for both of them. Because if the man's tempter is effective in changing negatively the personality of the man, well, that's going to help the mother's tempter because the negative change in the mother and the son is going to have a negative effect on the mother and vice versa. So, being able to egg each other on in a bad way, they're going to lie. But just remember, I don't know that such partnerships are really partnerships. If one of those tempters could turn on the other for an advantage, my guess is they would. But anyway, so we've got, a neat little aside that there are two tempters basically here at work. So be in contact with him, find out the things about her that she struggles with or that she's not good at, or that really she's annoyed with the son about. And if we can mutually kind of keep poking at those sore spots between the two of them, then we can have sort of this multiplier effect and make them both as miserable as possible.
I like the word pinpricks.
Pinpricks.
Because it's just those little tiny
pinpricks. Yeah. So much of what will be written in his advice is going to be keeping him from thinking big, deep thoughts, being introspective or asking big questions. Everything is very surfacey, moment by moment by moment. And when you think about it, if we are faced with a giant moment in crisis, it may be serious enough where we actually give it deep thought and try to make a wise decision. But the out of nowhere little quick poke, we tend to just react to. We don't really say, now, how should I properly and faithfully respond? It's just a little thing, and you just have a little knee-jerk reaction. As a matter of fact, the smaller the annoyance, the less we really consider how we respond to it. When the mosquito is buzzing by your ear and won't leave you alone, do you formulate this extensive plan and consider the cost-benefit analysis? You just, so the little things, pick. The goal will be like the dripping water that both, as a torture device drives people insane, but as a work of erosion can bring down a mountain. Drip, pick, poke.
That's where we get the word nitpicking.
That's That's one of the best songs in the Music Man. Pick a little, talk a little, pick a little, talk a little, pick, talk a lot, pick a little more. And it seems very silly and it seems very light, except I'm thinking of how incredibly easy it is to be in a foul mood when I have a sunburn. It's a very common thing. It's a very easy thing to have happen. But when you've got a sunburn and you're just uncomfortable, everything else just looks a little worse. Everything else just, you know, the universe is out to get you at that moment. A sunburn like on your back, on your shoulders, and it's just like you can't. And then don't touch me. You know, it's not an enormous thing. It's not a debilitating pain. It's just enough of a little pinprick. When we actually have an accident in the kitchen, we slip and we maybe get a nick with a knife. You know, we can be upset or we can be scared or we can, you know, whatever. But you slip with a piece of paper and you get a nasty paper cut. And it's just, you'll feel your mood turn on a dime. Paper cuts just make you mad. Nobody's scared of a paper cut. Nobody's worried about a paper cut. You're angry, or you're annoyed, or you're exasperated. The little pick, the just discomfort. Trying to sleep in a room that's just a little bit too hot. Not miserable, you're not boiling, but it's just a little bit too hot. Or a pillow that it just doesn't quite, you know? And just, it's the foul mood. It's the foul mood. Isn't it something that he's not proposing, you know, entice him to murder, entice him to go to the strip clubs, entice him to shoot cocaine in his nostril. I mean, just like, it's all these things that we sort of think about, you know, the depths of depravity. And he's just like, make him really annoyed. Because what's going to happen when he's really annoyed? What do you think is going to happen between mother and son when they're both just kind of annoyed at each other? What's going to happen?
Take it out on each other. In reality,
Yeah.
Over nothing.
Right. Over nothing. Over nothing. And then those angry comments, those repeated, and the people just, you start
in your separate ways. Putting up a wall,
all right. There is a, so there's another little backwards thing here. We talked about the positive good of God working on the inside and the outside, but Screwtape actually says, if he's doing this or he's starting to pray, which is not good, don't get me wrong, it's not good, encourage him to be as spiritual as possible. What do you think he means by that?
To feel.
Feeling is a huge thing with this one.
Instead of, I lost the word I'm looking for, but try to have feelings about your prayer.
There's a lot that people talk about, and basically keep this guy in mind that if the feelings don't follow what he does, it is somehow not working, or it's wrong, or it's fake. The feelings, how you feel, is absolutely connected to your faith, and it is kind of the judge of what is true and false, or what's working and not working. What's dangerous about that? Are feelings wrong?
No, but you're too wrapped up in the feeling and not trusting to let go of that and find something deeper.
Right? Here, the thing about feelings are actually a gift. You know, all this stuff, all this of what we have is first and foremost a gift from God. But gifts can be misused, gifts can be messed up or broken or whatever. Feelings are just not reliable. Why would I say that? I'm not saying true and false, I'm saying not reliable.
Well, it's your perception, I think. That's just your perception.
Right? And what might influence a perception in a way that's not necessarily reliable as far as true and false is concerned?
It could be how you're feeling, and I don't mean that.
Your old
How
habits, how you were raised.
Old habits, how you're raised,
If you're having a bad day.
having a bad day.
And we're very selfish. And
Very,
self-centered.
sure.
And
And the encouragement is, Screwtape wants us to stay there. You've seen that, they've been running now for years. Snickers commercials. You aren't you when you're hungry.
Yeah.
You're hangry. Your feelings are not reliable because we don't have a ton of control over how we feel at any given moment. Did you have a bad night's sleep? You're probably going to feel in a worse mood rather than a better mood. Are you hungry and you haven't eaten yet? You're probably going to perceive things more negatively than positively. Do you have a sunburn? Is it a full moon out? Who in the world knows? Our feelings can kind of come and go and wax and wane in ways that we don't really have a ton of control over. We can influence, but sometimes they just come. Are your hormones doing something to you today? Are you just feeling physically under the weather today? But these little things, if everything is judged on how we feel, but we can't really control how we feel that well, then it's just not a good predictor of what is actually true and false, what's happening and what's not happening. It can be helpful context, it can be positive information, but it can also be leading us down the wrong path. But there's Screwtape again. Keep him thinking surfacey, surfacey, surfacey. Feelings, feelings, feelings. And it's not that feelings are bad, it's that feelings are unreliable. Imagine if we connected all of our decisions to completely unreliable things. What kind of decisions would we make? Probably unreliable ones, but likely not very good ones. Not very good ones, especially if somebody like Wormwood is pinpricking us so that those feelings are more likely negative ones than positive ones. Annoyance and irritation. When you are hungry, do you tend to make wiser decisions or more foolish decisions? That's why the candy aisle is at the cash register of the grocery store. That impulse purchase is a real thing. They do tons of research, and they have for decades, about where to put certain foods in certain aisles so that, for instance, usually the healthier foods that you have to prepare yourself are way in the back. And the pre-prepared, snacky sort of foods are usually up front.
And up and down too.
Up and down. You have to kind of work for them, right? The stuff that has a better profit margin is an eye line, and it's easy to get to, and maybe you see it in certain obvious spots. So again, this sense of how you feel at any given moment can be manipulated into making some very unwise choices. When you're hungry and you go shopping, you tend to get food that's already prepared and more expensive because you're hungry. You're not thinking, what I'd really like to do is, I'd like to stew that down for about 3 hours. Really, I'd like to chop all those vegetables and, really sweat them down and really bring out some of those aromatics. Like, no, like, I just want a piece of pie. I'm hungry right now. And again, think about that in our interpersonal relationships. How you're feeling, especially if it's negative. Having a conversation with somebody, but you're in a bad mood. Haven't we all been able to tell when certain people are in bad moods, even when they try to hide it?
Oh, yeah.
certain people, when they're in a bad mood, like the whole room kind of changes. They haven't said a word. The whole room, you kind of feel it.
You can read them just by looking at them.
Right.
You don't have to say a word. Say, uh-oh.
There is a painfully practical section here. Painfully practical. I hated reading it because, you know, I accuse myself and I am convicted. When two humans have lived together for many years, it usually happens that each has a tone of voice and expressions of face which are almost unendurably irritating to the other. Work on that. Bring fully into the consciousness of your patient that particular lift of his mother's eyebrows that she learned to dislike in the nursery. Let him think how much he dislikes it. Let him assume that she knows how annoying it is, and she does it to annoy. If you know your job, he will not notice the immense improbability of the assumption. And of course, never let him suspect that he has tones and looks which similarly annoy her, as he cannot see or hear himself. This is easily managed.
I wouldn't have thought of it that way, but it said something about she was annoyed that he was learning things now that she had tried to teach him and
Sure.
it didn't go.
Sure. Now, we're given, like, work on that, like bring that up, bring that out, because that is a source of potential conflict. So imagine, again, we've talked about this being England in the early 40s. So if this guy is, say, maybe in his 20s, he was raised at a time where church attendance might not have been mandatory, but it was definitely expected. It was assumed. You know, depending on the school he went to, there would have been regular chapel services. And so to have someone who is now an adult talk about they've come to faith can go in one of two ways to a believing parent. The believing parent can say, that's wonderful, I'm so glad it finally happened. Or they can say, what do you mean? Like, what about all those times I took you to Sunday school? What about all those Sundays that we sat? Did that mean nothing to you? Why was that not good enough? I mean, again, it's the exact same scenario, but those perceptions then elicit a different kind of response. But that little element really gets me about everybody's got these little things, the little quirks that annoy us and the people that we spend time with. And it's just human nature. Keep whispering in his ear that they know it annoys you and that they do it on purpose. What are the odds? What are the odds that this person that you know, that you care about, that you see a lot, has thought, what can I do today to really get their goat? Aha, I know. As soon as they catch my eye, I'm going to give them that expression. You know, I'm not saying it couldn't happen. Sometimes we do deliberately annoy one another. But all these little things that just kind of part of that indignation that we feel, isn't it because, well, you're doing it on purpose? Are they really? Especially when we're just talking about little habits, little quirks, little things.
I don't think most people realize what they're doing.
I've got looks that I don't know that I'm giving. My kids say it all the time. Oh, there's that look again. What look?
Yeah. Unless you're looking in the mirror.
Oh, I hear it in your voice. What do you mean? I didn't say anything. And we're judge, jury, and executioner about how someone's annoying expression is clearly understood to be annoying by them, and they're doing it on purpose just to get to me, with zero self-reflection of what stupid habits I do that annoy other people. Because it's their fault, and they're doing something on purpose because they're jerks. Because I don't do anything like that to them. Except, of course, all the things that I do all the time. But don't let him think about that. Let him concentrate on how inconsiderate the other person is. Every small inconsideration, blow it up in his mind. Every potential 50-50, was this inconsiderate or accidental? Make sure you tip it over to say it's inconsiderate. And now, after 3 in a row, you've got to be doing it on purpose. Now, of course, I would never put myself under that sort of standard. When my behavior is misunderstood, I didn't mean that. You need to forgive me for that. You need to understand that I didn't really mean that. And we should be okay. But when someone else does it to me, oh, well, that's another story. You big dummy. Because you're just a jerk. And how easy that is. These are pinpricks, man. These are just like, this is not a big change your worldview kind of thing. But to put yourself in the perception that other people are out to get you and you're the victim, that can seem very massive, like this big existential thing. Or how about just keeping it really simple and really small? Everyone is inconsiderate and you're only misunderstood. If that becomes your kind of habit and pattern of perspective, when somebody says something that I'm not sure, mean or accidental, the odds are it's mean. But when I do it, mean or accidental, I know that I didn't do it on purpose. You are setting yourself up, aren't you?
It's like a human voodoo doll.
And these are little steps. But if every step is away from the fellowship of God, then every step is another one towards hell.
Mhm.
And if there ought to be an enduring, life-giving relationship, wouldn't you assume it's mother and child?
Mhm.
You hope so.
You know, when there are problems there between mother and child, doesn't it feel tougher and sadder?
Oh yeah.
Don't you have, we all kind of have an expectation, like the way it ought to be is so close and so, trusting in one another.
And especially if it has been and is going
Right.
down.
Yes.
And I think it has a lot to do with siblings too. How different the relationships are between first, second, third.
And which they have to be because every child is different.
Right.
Every person is different.
Right.
They don't like to hear, because now it's a hierarchy. Well, you like them better than me and you like me less than so-and-so or whatever.
Or the cookie cutter kids. Like the whole family's the same stamp.
Here's another good one. I've had patients of my own so well in hand that they could be turned at a moment's notice from impassioned prayer for a wife or son's soul to beating or insulting the real wife or son without a qualm. Now that is deeply insidious and despicable. Prevent him from praying for his mother. But if you can't prevent that, make sure that his prayers are abstract. Pray for her immortal soul. He has no concept of what an immortal soul is. We demons do, and we're frightened. But he's a dummy. He can't see with spiritual eyes. So it's an abstraction. Keep him thinking about that abstraction. Because if he's praying for the abstraction, he's not praying for the real person. The real person, then, when he sees them, he can still treat poorly, or he can still be annoyed by, or he can still have problems with, because he's not actually praying for that real person. He's praying for an abstraction that doesn't really exist. But if you would start praying earnestly for that real person, for her strengths and her weaknesses, for her good things and her bad things, what would he find happening in his own heart towards her?
Will be softened.
It invariably. When I do like premarital counseling or couples counseling, one of the things that I tell people, it's funny that the younger generation seems to have more trouble with this. They have to kind of work their heads through it. When you are angry and frustrated and feeling separated out from someone, and it happens, again, our emotions are difficult and we don't always have a lot of control of them. Act in a loving way towards them consistently. Make a choice of will. I will act in a loving manner towards you. Because biblical love is less about our feelings than it is about our faithfulness. It's less about our emotions than it is about our commitment. So act in a loving way towards them. You know what you're going to find about your feelings and emotions? They're going to come back around. It is almost impossible to act consistently loving towards someone and not feel those emotions of affection. Even when you're annoyed, even when you're angry, act repeatedly in a loving fashion towards them with actions and behaviors. You don't even have to work on changing your emotions. Just do the right thing in your behavior. Your emotions will start coming back. They will start turning back around. We are built body and soul together, and if our bodies will act in loving manners, our emotions will follow.
So they call it killing with kindness.
Well, the funny thing is, when I've talked to younger folks about that, they don't like it. Well, that's insincere. Like, well, you're just telling me to fake it until I make it. Like, no, there's no faking involved. It's a matter of your choice and your will. It's not fake. You are actually acting in a loving fashion towards them. Your feelings are separated out right now, but your behavior really is loving. Because that's what love is. It's not just having fond feelings. It's acting in a way that is faithful and committed. And so you're just trying to pull those emotions back because it tends to run off like a stray dog. You know, an ill-behaved dog that if the door gets left open, bolts out, and you have to go chasing and running down. So Screwtape as an opposite is saying, keep it as surfacey as possible, keep prayers as abstract as possible, have him see his mother in a completely contradictory term, as a being who doesn't really exist, but who's also doing all of these obnoxious things completely on purpose. And if you can keep all that stuff in his head, you are driving a wedge between the two of them that is only going to get deeper and deeper and deeper. And frankly, it's going to turn him into a person, with or without his mother, who is worse and worse and worse. Because if you can treat your mother like an abstraction, how do you think he's going to treat everybody else?
Worse.
There's I'm going to bring up a highlight that I have because you mentioned it, but about the coming to faith late in life and what is the mother's response to that? And here's the very last line in this letter. Remember the elder brother in the enemy's story. So that is a reference to what we typically call the prodigal son, the parable of the prodigal son. So remember, when the prodigal comes back and the father is overjoyed and kill the fatted calf and everything else, what does the elder brother do?
It's mad.
He gets angry.
He gets mad and he gets angry. What else? What does he do with that anger?
It goes off and sulks.
He leaves. He leaves. He won't go into the party. And when they talk about it, that son of yours, he has now separated himself out, not just from his brother, he's separated himself out from his father. All because he's indignant. Anybody remember how the father responds?
He said, well, I had to. He was dead and he's back.
Yes, but there's something missing. That son of yours did blah, 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 blah. And the answer is, your brother was dead, but now he is alive. That is the act of our Father, that when we are at odds with each other, with that indignation or bitterness or whatever, oh God, your son is such a creep and a jerk. No. Not my son, your brother. You don't get to separate yourself. And if you can get your mind wrapped back around that, that this is family, you are still connected, you are still tied together, then maybe that will soften. Because it's like you could tell, it's like a cliche in a movie or something like that, like when the mother or the father is annoyed at a child, your child is like, your child too, right? But when you say your child, like, well, I don't want to have anything to do with them. That's your mess now. So Screwtape wants us to do that. Highlight the indignation, highlight the separatedness out, highlight they have nothing to do with me. But what is the biblical story other than God bringing both children, not just back to him, father to son, but to each other, brother to brother. Letter 4. We've had another letter in the meantime. It must have mentioned prayer, because it starts right off with Wormwood must have mentioned something about prayer that's really kind of annoyed Screwtape, as though this junior devil had the temerity to lecture him. We can glean then from this first paragraph that Wormwood tried to follow Screwtape's advice about getting him praying for his mother, but as an abstraction, and then something went wrong, meaning something went right. But basically, Wormwood apparently has blamed Screwtape, like, you gave me bad advice. You told me to do this thing and I did it, and now the situation is worse. And how does Screwtape feel about that?
Said you're shifting responsibility. You must learn to pay for your own blunders.
That's right. That's right. This is not just a nephew talking to an uncle. Like, this is, an underling speaking to a manager. And, I gave you good advice. The fact that you screwed it up is not on me. That's on you. So now we have to kind of work through and try to find out what the screw up is. And so,
he must have accidentally, sincerely prayed for his
mother. That's right. So instead of keeping it as an abstraction, if he started praying for her as a person, especially as a person he was annoyed with, oh boy, you want some practical discipleship advice about how to reconcile with someone? Start praying very deliberately for somebody that you don't like, acknowledging the things about them you don't like in prayer. And you will find it very difficult to maintain that posture of annoyance. But we now start getting into the nature of prayer, both as a practical thing, but also almost in a existential idea that you should try to encourage him to pray in certain ways.
Right.
Like, if you can't keep him from praying, which you should have done in the first place, then plan B is to have him praying how?
Like when he was a kid.
So
like he wrotely learned to say our Father, or
yes.
Now I lay me down to sleep.
Yes,
whatever.
But he kind of takes it to the next level, like have him thinking about that, but then get him to think that that is somehow beneath him, that that's only for children. Remember, Screwtape is perfectly content to have humans think about quote unquote spiritual matters, provided that is a self-defined, vague, surfacey spirituality. The more based on our feelings, the better. He's all over that. That's not to say that spiritual things are devilish or wrong. It's to say we have very little sense of what we're doing in the spiritual realms. We have very little sense. Remember we talked a couple of weeks ago about the words that we speak during the Eucharistic prayer? about joining our voices with angels and archangels and all the company of heaven, do you have a real sense of sitting in one of those pews and feeling the heavenly host speaking these words alongside of you? If we can open up our minds for a moment and try to take that in, it's almost too overwhelming to consider. That's spiritual, but almost like with a capital S, spiritual. He says keep them in a lowercase spiritual. Fuzzy things, feeling things.
One of the funniest ones was talking about when he was in his room and he prayed to the guy that was up in the corner.
Right.
Love
Yeah. So like laying in bed or whatever. And if you can associate God with like the upper left-hand corner of your room or something like that, or a crucifix as an object. And and this is again the subtlety of temptation and also the subtlety of Lewis's writing, which is so clever and creative. These things, these kind of childish things, can still be childlike and incredibly powerful and true. The Eastern Christian tradition of the icon is intended to be a window that you look through to see something deeper behind it. Like what do windows do? When you look at a window, you're not looking at the glass. You're looking through the glass at what's behind it. Now, maybe if the glass is real dirty or smudged or cracked, you notice it, but then that window is not really doing its job, is it? If you notice the glass of the window, something's wrong. It's not a good window, or it's a inferior or incomplete, or it's a window that needs to be changed somehow. An icon, and icons are sometimes so stylized, they look sort of weird, at least to Westerners. In seminary, there was a kind of a basement room that it was like a library or study or something that had a lot of icons in it. And so we dubbed it the creepy icon room because they were super stylized and they just did not look, I like representational pictures of people. Give me a good Renaissance portrait that looks like the person. And, an icon, this style actually is intended to communicate something about the nature of the saint or the nature of God or whatever. And it's purposefully not an exact representation because you're not supposed to look at them. You're supposed to look through them. You see the icon, and in prayer, your mind goes past the image into the deeper reality of God. That's spiritual with a capital S. But as long as I'm just looking at an icon and saying, why is he that color? Why do his eyes look like that? Why are his fingers too long? Why does he look so angular? Then that's stupid. That's dumb.
It's distracting.
I'm distracted now, but it's not really the icon's fault. That's my fault. Because now I'm spiritual with a lowercase s. I get no good feelings from that. I don't get a spiritual high. I don't feel deeply connected. It's not the icon's fault. Someone else can look at that icon and look through it like a window into heaven and be connected with a capital S, spiritual. There's I think it got moved into a meme status, but I saw it was posting online, a month or two ago, but it was talking about somebody who was raised in a mega church, and they're like, for years, I felt so deeply spiritual during, when the worship band would do these certain things, and then I went to a concert and I realized I just really like music.
Yeah, it's entertainment.
There is a way to purposefully connect emotions through things like music and lighting and everything else. And I'm not saying that's bad or wrong, but if you have judged, I have had a spiritual encounter today based off of those feelings, well, what happens when you can manufacture those same feelings in a completely different setting, like in a rock concert? What does that tend to do other than have you think, well, I guess it's all a bunch of nothing. That whole religion stuff must not be true because I get those same feelings somewhere else. It's not talking about God at all. Therefore, again, now we're back to spiritual with a lowercase s. The uppercase S might be able to use those same feelings, but not have them drive the bus, just be a passenger on the bus. If that makes any sense. He is saying, you know, these prayers, get him to remember the prayers of his youth, but have them think of them as beneath him. Not childlike, trusting, open, believing, simple. That's childlike. Make it childish, uncritical, foolish, wrong-headed, immature. And then get him to say, well, I can't do that anymore. I have to come up with prayers. I have to spontaneously pray. Is there something wrong with spontaneous prayer?
No.
Absolutely not. But again, what is your judge and arbiter if you have made a connection in the presence of God? If it's all about these feelings, well, I said these words, they came from my heart, so I know it. I know it's true. That's a surfacey feeling. Whether it's actually true or not, connecting it only to those surfacey feelings is unreliable and it's very dangerous because it keeps us on the surface. It's a little bit like saying, oh, we don't have any liturgies in my church. Oh, sure you do. Every church has liturgies. Yours are just different than mine. You know, they may be less formal. But what is a liturgy other than a pattern that allows us to worship together on a consistent fashion? It's a practical expression of our worship together. Well, but we don't have a prayer book. We don't say, okay, do you go to church the same day of the week? Well, yeah. Same time? Like, you don't just show up, like, sometimes you show up at 3, sometimes you show up at 9 a.m. No, of course, we go to the same. Okay. Do you go to the same building? Uh-huh. Is there any kind of outline? Like, you know, do you sometimes pray when you get together? Well, of course. Do you ever, I don't know, read the Bible or something when you get together? Well, yeah, we have Bible readings every Sunday. Does anybody ever speak? Well, sure. These are all liturgies. They can be simple, they can be less formal, but these are all liturgies. There is nothing more or less inherently spiritual about a liturgy that is more formal or less formal. But he's encouraging, make those distinctions. Remember when he started talking about if he goes to church, have him look at the people next to him and be annoyed by them.
Yeah.
Have him judge them.
Right.
Look at the people and say, well, his shoes squeak and that's obnoxious, or I know that he's not a nice man to his cat, so he's a hypocrite and maybe none of this count. Again, it's all this surfacey element of make him connect the success of prayers or worship to these vague, mysterious feelings that he has little control over. Because then, if the feelings don't happen, he will become discouraged. He did something wrong. God is not listening, or maybe God is not real. I will say, just as a personal thing, one of the greatest gifts of the more formal traditional liturgy for me is when I don't feel it. It's like the saints of old are grabbing me arm in arm and helping me move forward. I don't always feel the joy down in my heart, like every single moment when I am here on a Sunday. You know? But that doesn't make what I say or what I do less true. If anything, I am grateful that both the church doesn't require that, it actually helps me through it. So when the emotions do come back, I'm not been like rejected or anything. I'm carried along with it. But also, God's love for me is not based on how I am feeling at that moment. Well, I have tested the depth of your emotion this morning and it is found lacking. Therefore, you're out. God, he doesn't say that to us ever. And that is
shouldn't say it to people
that
church.
that is a source of should be a source of great comforting and encouragement to us, because sometimes you're not feeling it. But here we are again. This is kind of this uppercase S spiritual, lowercase s spiritual. And Screwtape is he's pointed with this is like humans are so comically stupid for forgetting that they are animals, that they have a body and a soul. We are pure spirit. So for good or for bad, we don't have this baggage all around it. And for him, Screwtape would never want the weaknesses of flesh. He doesn't see the benefits, it's just weaknesses. But we forget that we are body and we are soul. And those things ought to be and to stay connected. And he's got to think about it. It's funny how mortals always picture us, like, the temptations and the whispers or whatever, putting things into their head, when the reality is most of what we do is just keep thoughts out. We want them thinking less and feeling more. It's a repeated theme, isn't it? Think less, feel more. Now, some of this is C.S. Lewis because of who he is by temperament. He's a thinker. But I don't think he's wrong. Because again, our feelings and our emotions, they're just not reliable. They can be very good. They can be very powerful. They are gifts from God, but they're just not reliable. The Super Bowl just passing a few days ago. You want emotions on your team? I just don't think you want to be the quarterback. So teach them to estimate the value of each prayer by their success in producing the desired feeling. So if I say the Lord's Prayer, but I don't get a zing in my heart, it must have been worthless. When Lewis brings up through Screwtape about his children's prayers, and he even he'll talk about posture and stuff. You need to understand this biographically about him. Until he physically couldn't, as an adult convert, coming to Christ in his 20s, C.S. Lewis, before bed every night, knelt by his bed, clasped his hands, and prayed. I've always been sort of marveled at that, a little humbled by that. I never do that. Is it strictly necessary? I wouldn't argue that it's strictly necessary, but what is he saying? That we are body and soul. Why would we assume that our posture doesn't matter? Why would we assume that these actions make no difference whatsoever? We actually know it does. We know it does. And maybe I'm missing out on something. I'm not going to call it an essential. I'm condemned because I don't do it. No, but maybe it would be better for me if I did. Not taking your vitamins might not kill you, but maybe if you took your vitamins, you might feel a little better. Whenever there is prayer, there is a danger of the enemy's own immediate action. He is cynically indifferent to the dignity of his position. This is Screwtape accusing God of being cynically indifferent to his own dignity. Screwtape is annoyed and disgusted that God looks at our feeble attempts and accepts it mercifully and graciously. That's beneath him. He should demand more. He should demand better. This is back to the prodigal son. From a long way off, the prodigal comes, and what is the father's response? He runs to him. How undignified. Even in the cultural context, like I've said this in a sermon before, adult males didn't run. It was super undignified. They're wearing like long flowing. It's like picking up your skirts kind of and running. And you would be humiliating yourself to do that. The father humiliates himself to embrace the son. He doesn't like, well, he's coming. Well, he can come all the way here then. Instead, and this is God in prayer. Our prayers, even our crummy ones. God is not insisting on his own dignity to refuse the scraps. How dare you offer such a lowly prayer? You're barely even paying attention. I will ignore you until I'm convinced you are sufficiently in awe of me. And instead, that is the incarnation as a whole, is it not? The humiliation of God, humiliation, the humbling to the earth, to the dirt of God in the incarnation.
And with the son coming home and feeling ashamed to see his father run towards him must have been very
comforting. It changes everything, doesn't it?
Because he's not supposed to run, right? So he's running, that means he's happy to see me. So that kind of takes the sting out of the kind of reception he's going to get.
If he ever comes to make the distinction, if he ever consciously directs his prayers, not to what I think thou art, but to what thou knowest thyself to be, our situation is for the moment desperate. The moment that the patient, the human, each of us may be willing to lay down our expectations of God and simply offer honor and praise for who God simply is, not what I've made him out to be or what I demand in response or whatever, is when that soul is then humbled before its maker and it is never closer. And the danger to the tempting demon is never higher. Keep his thoughts surfacey and rigid. Do not let him be open and humble. Don't let him think he is not able to fully comprehend, but must simply surrender. Keep him in a position of judgment. Keep him in a position where he is both insecure about himself. Did I pray right because I don't have the right feelings? But also sitting in judgment of God. I didn't get out of this what I wanted, therefore God is not there, or it's not for me, or whatever it might be.
I prayed for healing, but it didn't happen.
Yeah, so screw you. Right? There's a story about the death of Stalin, who in earlier years was a Orthodox seminarian. Stalin studied for the Orthodox priesthood for a while. Of course, Stalin wants in power, angry, militant atheist who did everything he could to crush not just the church, but faith at all. And near his death, family was trying to send in Orthodox priests. And even in his inability to speak, was angrily motioning them out. And then one of the biographers said, like at his moment of death, this, you know, he had not really been conscious or awake at all for some period of time, seems to have a moment of final lucidity, and simply from his bed shakes his fist towards the heavens and then dies. There's a somewhat cliched but kind of a pop answer about describing contemporary atheism. God does not exist, and I hate him.
Just in case, right?
You know, or I hate him for not existing. Or what, you know, it's just that it's that contradictory, you know, again, and Screwtape will be delighted at this. Keep their heads filled with contradictory things that make no sense if they would stop to think about it. Okay, anything else? All right, so 5 and 6 next time.
Yep.
Okay.
Next Wednesday's Ashland.
Oh, that's right. So no class next Wednesday. We will pick it up the Wednesday after. All right, thank you.